What you're about to hear is not a rumor. It's not gossip. It's a deeply disturbing pattern of behavior spanning 15 years, involving multiple women, a prominent ministry, and a pastor who still thinks he deserves to come back. For those who don't know him, Ted Shuttlesworth Jr. was the co-pastor of Miracle Word Church in West Palm Beach, Florida. He co-founded Miracle Word Ministries in 2010, authored nearly 20 books, ran a podcast, founded Miracle Word University, and was considered one of the sharper voices in the prosperity gospel space. He comes from what people call a preaching dynasty. His father is televangelist Ted Shuttlesworth Sr. His uncle is Tiff Shuttlesworth. His cousin is Jonathan Shuttlesworth. Ministry runs deep in this family. Ted Shuttlesworth Jr. co-pastored Miracle Word Church alongside his wife, Carolyn. He co-founded Miracle Word Ministries in 2010, which grew into a full operation. A physical congregation of about 200 members, online media, evangelistic crusades, an educational ministry, and even a clothing line. He was widely seen as part of a newer, more media-savvy wing of the prosperity gospel world. Young, articulate, present on social media. By all appearances, a thriving, God-honoring operation. But appearances, as we're about to see, were everything to Ted. Last month, news broke that Ted Shuttlesworth Jr. was stepping down from ministry. He issued a letter to his ministry partners. Part of it read, and I want to quote him directly so you can hear how he framed this. Unfortunately, in the midst of so many miracles and breakthroughs, I let my own guard down. I failed to stand in my authority when temptations came. Needless to say, my actions opened the door, which I allowed, for sin to come in through loose and inappropriate conversations with the opposite sex. These sinful actions culminated in sexual activity with a woman who was not my wife. Now, his wife Carolyn, in her own letter, clarified that those conversations were not with one woman. She described them as multiple inappropriate conversations. Read that again. He wrote, a woman. She corrected him and said multiple women. Already, we can see how carefully crafted his language was. He admitted to just enough to appear repentant, while obscuring the full scope of what he had done. That's not repentance. That's damage control. After the initial story broke, several women came forward to protest with accounts of their own interactions with Ted Shuttlesworth Jr. When investigators began piecing together these accounts, it became clear this was not about a pastor having a crisis of faith that led to one affair. This was a systematic, long-running pattern of behavior. Obscene messages, explicit images, manipulative spiritual framing, and calculated predation that spanned at least 15 years and involved at least 6 women. The women we'll discuss today have been granted anonymity, which is standard editorial practice when reporting on victims of clergy sensual misconduct. Their identities have been verified. Some have indicated a willingness to go on the record publicly if necessary. Their names in this story are pseudonyms. 1. Carrie's story. The first account begins in 2010. A woman we'll call Carrie first met Ted when he came to preach at a camp near her hometown. He was a friend of her husband's. There was nothing inappropriate during that initial visit. But the following summer, when the Shuttlesworths returned, the text messages began. He told her he missed her pregnant belly, that he found pregnant women attractive. He sent her a friend request from an account using the name Richard Long, with the obvious implication in that name left as an exercise for the viewer. Then he asked her to review a book he was writing. She describes it as a graphic, sensual novel, and the characters were modeled directly on the two of them. She unfriended him. But months later, when she got a new phone, the messages resumed. She admits that she was at a vulnerable place in her life, that the attention felt good, and that she engaged. I respect her honesty. Here is what followed. He began sending messages in a reversed alphabet code, making it look like a toddler had been hitting the keyboard. He taught her the code so they could communicate covertly. He asked about her appearance, what she was wearing, and eventually her sex life. He also shared explicit details about his wife, what she liked, what he liked, even sharing intimate visual material of Carolyn and asking Carrie to reciprocate. These messages continued for years. Even when he visited and stayed in her home, he kept his hands to himself. But the psychological and emotional manipulation continued. Carrie eventually began to pull away. By 2017, the messages had stopped entirely. But by then, the damage had been done. Her first marriage ended in divorce. She describes a spiritual collapse, working, volunteering, are trying to hold herself together, while Ted Shuttlesworth Jr. continued to rise. I was stupid enough to believe he actually cared about me, she said. Before her divorce, she confessed everything to her husband and attempted to restore the marriage. It did not survive. Her future new husband, upon hearing what Ted had done, messaged him back in that same reversed alphabet code. Ted never responded. 2. Chloe's story. Carrie eventually told a few people. One of them was her sister-in-law. We'll call her Chloe. Chloe was familiar with Ted through mutual connections in ministry. He had preached at several churches in her area. They too had begun texting. She describes him as popping up regularly, multiple times a week sometimes. She initially thought he was just being friendly, even until he mentioned buying her a birthday gift from Victoria's Secret. She didn't even know what that was. He would make comments about her becoming pregnant, commenting on how she got there. She describes his messages as vaguely flirtatious, steering conversations in a certain direction, testing to see how far she would follow, and pulling back when she didn't engage the way he wanted. When she mentioned these conversations to Carrie, they discovered they were both receiving the same treatment. Finding out she wasn't alone was, for Chloe, the catalyst she needed to distance herself from him entirely. 3. Tiffany's story. This is the account that brings the story fully into the present. And it is, in many ways, the most devastating. Tiffany was born and raised Roman Catholic. In 2019, while visiting her mother, she attended revival meetings in Massachusetts, where Ted Shuttlesworth Jr. was the guest speaker. She was saved at those meetings. She was baptized there. This man led her to faith. She became deeply embedded in Miracle Word Ministries, the Victory Tribe, their events, and their community. She was a single mother. She found meaning, purpose, and family in this ministry. By 2023, the year they formally launched Miracle Word Church, she had visited the ministry 13 times in 1 year despite living across the country. Her face was on their Facebook pages. She modeled their clothing line. She helped organize their crusades and tent meetings across multiple states. She poured years of her life into this. And then one day, Ted told her he had something to show her. She said yes, not knowing what to expect. Or he sent her a sexual image involving his wife. He followed this by asking her to participate, asking whether she would perform sexual acts for him. And in language that is difficult to describe, he framed it as though his wife Carolyn was also interested, asking Tiffany whether she would honor Carolyn in certain ways. When Tiffany expressed discomfort, he told her to delete the images. When she confronted him, he did not apologize with integrity. Instead, he told her it was her fault, that she was too beautiful, that she had caused him to react in a way he'd never reacted to anyone else. Then he asked her to fast and pray for him. She did. She fasted. She prayed for days. She believed that her intercession was the only thing standing between Ted and spiritual destruction. That is how thoroughly he had rewired her thinking. That's how he literally drew it in my brain, she told investigators. And then, this past October, after 5 years, she received a formal job offer to join Miracle Word Church full-time. She would move to Florida, leave her cleaning business, uproot her daughters, start a new life. Her church threw her a going-away party. She spent over $10,000 on the move, another $10,000 to secure housing. 4 days before she moved, Ted messaged her saying how excited he was for her to come. She arrived on Saturday. Ted was absent on Sunday. The following Sunday, Ted stood before his congregation and confessed he had been having an affair. The church he invited her to move across the country for? It no longer existed. And here is the part that cuts deepest. They knew she was coming. They knew she was selling her business, packing up her children, and spending her savings. They knew, and they brought her down anyway. So how did this come to light? One of the women Ted had been messaging, we'll call her Claudia, was attending Rodney Howard Brown's The River Church, where she was involved in the healing ministry. She began to feel a deep sense of conviction and guilt, and she disclosed what had been happening to church leadership. River Church leadership contacted the leadership at World Harvest Church in Georgia in October 2025 and informed them of what had been uncovered. That leadership then confronted Ted directly. At that point, Ted asked not to be publicly exposed until after the Christmas holiday, so he could spend time with his family. They agreed. So, for the next several months, while the investigation continued behind closed doors, Miracle Word Church in Florida was still open. still collecting tithes and offerings, still running a year-end seed offering push, still promoting Miracle Word Plus memberships. All the while, Ted tried repeatedly to delay the reckoning, asking for extensions, bargaining, even requesting 21 days to fast and pray before telling his wife and congregation. During this window, a second woman was identified. We'll call her Ilana. She had a pre-existing professional relationship with Ted through ministry work. She confessed that he had been sending her messages as well. She later disclosed that they had engaged in sensual activity. And how did Ted explain this to Tiffany? He said the devil had found a weak moment. He was so focused on pouring out to others that he forgot to pour into himself. He claimed Elena was the one who pursued him, that she took advantage of him. I failed to stand in my authority when temptations came. That is how he described it. Interestingly, even within his own family, this was not treated lightly. Before Ted publicly confessed, two of his relatives, his uncle Tiff Shuttlesworth and his cousin Jonathan Shuttlesworth, addressed the situation on their own platforms. Without naming him, they condemned the behavior as sinful and predatory. According to Tiffany, Ted was furious at them for speaking publicly, even anonymously. Draw your own conclusions from that. The church closed. Most of the congregation scattered. For Tiffany, a newcomer to the city with no income, 2 daughters, and a new lease, the abandonment was total. She reached out to Ted and Carolyn multiple times. They were never available. Ted formed a private group chat, called the Cool Kids, for the most loyal remaining members. They continued meeting, visiting different churches on Sundays. Tiffany was in the group for a while, until someone mentioned that Ted had been sending obscene pictures of himself and his wife to multiple women. And the first image described was the exact image Ted had sent to Tiffany. She had kept his secret because she thought she was the only one. She wasn't. She confronted him. He changed the subject. And now we arrive at the part of the story that I think deserves the most careful attention. Neither Ted nor Carolyn have treated this as disqualifying. Ted's letter says, "For now, I am stepping away from ministry, and should God in His mercy give me another opportunity, I'm willing to answer the call." Carolyn's letter says, "Though he is stepping away from ministry for the time being, I will be stepping forward in greater leadership and ministry responsibility during this season." They were recently spotted at the Saturation Conference listening to Mark Hankins. Carolyn is still teaching Bible studies. Until just days ago, they were still collecting payments for Miracle Word Plus memberships. This is what concerns me deeply, not just the sin, but the framing. This is being treated as a season, a temporary setback, a pruning before a greater harvest. No genuine reckoning with the scope of what happened. No acknowledgement of the women individually harmed. No accountability structure. No independent investigation. Just a letter to ministry partners, a vague admission, and the assumption that ministry resumes when the moment is right. These weren't mere loose and inappropriate conversations, but rather a sustained pattern of sensual deviancy and predation, going back at least 15 years, involving at least 6 women that we've identified, and more that have not come forward. Sometimes people admit to small sins to conceal larger ones. Ted admitted to an affair. He described it as temptation he failed to resist. He framed himself as someone who forgot to pour into himself. What the evidence actually shows is a man who, across 15 years, used his position of spiritual authority to groom, manipulate, and SAED women, sending explicit material, fostering emotional dependency, extracting spiritual labor under false pretenses, and weaponizing faith language to redirect blame and avoid accountability. The women in this story, Carrie, Chloe, Tiffany, Claudia, Elena, and others, were not naive fools. They were people who trusted a pastor. That trust was systematically exploited. To the women who have already come forward, thank you. Your courage in speaking up, even when it cost you, is the reason the full picture is now coming to light. To the church at large, this is a reminder of why accountability structures matter. Why platforms should not be handed back to men who have demonstrated a pattern, not a moment, a pattern, of predatory behavior without genuine, independent, sustained accountability. Stepping down is not the same as being restored. Repentance is not a press release. If this story has been valuable to you, please share it, subscribe, leave a comment below. And as always, hold the line. This is Anointed TV Church Accountability because the church belongs to Christ. God bless you.